Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers, editors, occasionally agents, just folks in the publishing game to learn about them and the work they do, and hopefully how their experiences can help you if you are in this process of craziness that we call trying to be a professional writer. Before I introduce my guest, I would like to you please to take a moment, hit the subscribe button so you never miss a future episode. If you like what you hear today, it'd really be thrilling if you told a friend. That is the best way for endeavors like this one to gain an audience. And I've actually gained quite a few followers on both YouTube and in the podcasts from people who know somebody who is interested in writing, and they said, "Hey, you might want to check this out because these people know what they're talking about." So a nice review along those lines is also great. I appreciate any of the above, appreciate all of the above. Thank you. Um, so let's get on with it. As you know, on this show, I focus most of my attention on writers of thrillers, suspense, crime fiction, noir, but I do enjoy the occasional foray into nonfiction, especially for books like the one my guest today has written, that are essentially thrillers with a little bit of a hint of crime to them. Andrea Lankford is a former National Park Ranger who's also worked extensively in wilderness rescue and law enforcement, among many things. She is the author of 5 books, including the one we're here to talk about today. Trail of the Lost, the relentless search to bring home the missing hikers of the Pacific Coast Trail, which I have read. In fact, I think now my whole family has read and thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed. If you know it, if you've been following the show, you know that I am an avid outdoors person. In fact, next week, my wife and I will be celebrating our 20th wedding anniversary by taking a trip off trail on the east side of the Sierra, which is one of our very favorite places in the world. And I'm sure this is something Andrea and I might chat about here in just a minute, but I'm really thrilled to have her here today because I really enjoyed the book. Please welcome Andrea Lankford to the open mic. Andrea, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, look, I know there were a lot of highs and lows in this process of writing this particular book, as there are with any book, and we will get into some of those shortly. But for the uninitiated, why don't we just start off by, giving us some insight into what the book is about, and then we'll get into some of the other things.
So, Trail of the Lost, the relentless search to find the missing hikers of the Pacific Crest Trail, basically focuses on 3 young men who went missing, one each year, 3 years in a row, while through hiking. And a through hiker is someone who's trying to hike the entire trail from the Mexico border to the Canada border in one year. And they all vanished mysteriously from this same trail. And I got sucked into trying to solve these mysteries. And along the way, I met a bunch of amateurs who were equally driven to try to find answers for the families of these guys. And that drug me into a very dangerous, interesting, crazy world of threats that hikers on the Pacific Crest Trail face.
Like I say, and I mean it in the best possible way. It really does read like almost like a true crime or a high suspense novel because of all of those elements. And, like I say, I've spent a lot of years in the backcountry, uh, you know, um, met some mostly 99% of the people you meet are pretty normal, but there definitely are some squirrels out there. Definitely have run into those too. And again, as I was reading it, I was recounting in my mind some of those encounters, and it reminds me, why I carry a visible large knife on my side. I have no intention of ever having to use it, but that's part of the reason I do, is I would hope anyone who's a little too squirrely knows I'm not the guy to mess with. Um, there's a lot of things that come into play here. So again, maybe we'll talk a little bit about hiker culture just a little bit later, because I know we really want to get into um, the elements of the book, because some of the things that happen with you on this process, I think, are just really good things for aspiring writers to know. One of them is, as I noted, you're the author of 5 books, but this is the first one where you used an agent, correct?
Yes.
And tell me a little bit about that process because I think so many authors think that the golden ticket is to get an agent. And as again, anyone who's listened to my show before, they know I've had three. I'm on my third agent right now. So I have a different perspective maybe than that person, but share your perspective on that process of getting an agent and what it meant to you that was different for you this time from previous novels that you've written. Or not
Yes.
novels, but books you've written.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, my first three books that I published were guidebooks, mountain biking guide and a kind of a hiking narrative guide called Haunted Hikes. And so with those books, I didn't really need an agent because I knew I was going to go with a smaller publisher. And I was able to sell those books myself to the publishing entities. Then with Ranger Confidential, which I'd been writing all along, that was a narrative nonfiction that I thought was worthy of, the show, going to New York and getting a big publisher. So I tried to get an agent for that book. And I did briefly have one, but he just didn't have any luck. So I ended up parting ways with him, and I sold that book myself to a mid-sized publisher. Now, I Ranger Confidential did well. It did better than some books many books that, New York agents represent. So, Trail of the Lost, I knew this book deserved an agent. This book deserved a big five publisher, and so I'm used to being underestimated. So, what I decided to do was to write the book first. I was just going to finish the book. That way, when I pitched it, it would be very obvious that I knew what I was doing and that this was worthy. And eventually, I did get an agent for the book, Andrea Blatt with WME, and she got the book and the message right away. So then we worked on it a little bit together. When you get an agent, they might have some feedback for you. Like she gave me some good feedback to maybe highlight a little bit more how social media was impacting not only hiker culture, but missing persons investigations. So, I added that to the narrative and we restructured it a little bit. Then she started pitching it, and one of the first editors that looked at it gave me some feedback that some direction, guidance. This book, I wanted to focus on the searchers more than the men we were searching for, because focusing on the missing men, that's been done a million times, I felt. And I thought since I was a search and rescue person, I wanted to focus on how this impacted the searchers for the missing. And I had these wonderful women characters that I wrote about. But this particular publisher, they said to me, "We want you to change the book profoundly and focus on the men." And that was heartbreaking because I didn't think that was good advice. I had worked so hard. I was very invested in these female characters. You've read the book,
Hmm.
to take them
Hmm.
out of the story, that seemed crazy to me. And so that was demoralizing for me to hear that at this process. Fortunately, Andrea then submitted the book to Carrie Pelotano with Hachette, and Carrie loved the concept, got it right away. And that's sort of the happy ending of this story is that we worked hard on the book and it ended up becoming a New York Times bestseller, which I think surprised some people.
Well, I do think it's interesting when I um, read that about you about them wanting to change the focus to the men. Without me knowing that, of course, when I read the book, I actually thought it was great that the focus was on the women and not on these missing men hikers. And again, if you pay attention to this show, you kind of know where I'm coming from on a lot of these issues. I've talked a lot about my wife, who is a civil engineer, and she's the head of an agency of a sub-agency of the federal government that right now is going through a real machismo overhaul. She's one of the, in fact, she's the only woman in the history of a very large, very known entity to ever lead one of these agencies. It's a very male-dominated thing. So, yes, I tend to be maybe a little gravitate toward that more as a focal point anyway. But the point being here, I thought it was an interesting take on it because I thought their stories was what actually made it really interesting. And I'm going to backtrack even a little more. One of my other favorite great outdoor searcher books, I guess, was the last season by Eric Blame, where they were looking for a missing backcountry ranger who had, in the mid 90s, had seemed to have vanished off the face of the earth. And the thing that made that book so great, and I thought was really a connective tissue with yours, was the focus not so much on just the search, but on the people involved and the toll that it takes on the people involved and all the extraneous stuff that comes into play here. And so kudos to you for sticking to your guns because I think it would have been a much lesser book to have focused just on these people that were missing. You had plenty of that in there anyway. I mean, I felt like I got
Yeah.
lots of information on them, but I thought the backstory on, especially the woman who was a stepmom to one of these kids, my daughter's or my mom, or my wife is a stepmother up to my daughter, and I know that relationship has a different dynamic, and so I thought you captured so much of that so well. I'm talking a lot here. Let me kick it back to you here. Um, when you got that advice, well, two things, I guess. When you got that advice from that particular publishing entity or anyone else along the line, I mean, did you feel like at some point there was some element of there, well, yeah, we know you have all this experience, but you are a woman, and maybe, for us to sell this, we're going to have to focus it on men, either downplay your role or downplaying their role. Is that how it came across to you?
Yeah, like I'm not so sure, how sexist it was. If it was, there might be like threads of that, as opposed to like what I think you're trying to get at is they're looking for this cookie cutter stamp that matched what they thought they could sell, like an Into the Wild, where it focused Krakauer's book, where it
Yeah.
focused on the missing man. And I can understand that, but I had already done all this work, and I felt like obviously to another editor I had made it obvious that this was a story about the searchers and who happened to be a lot of them were women, not all. There was a lot of men too that participated. So yeah, I almost took it that way. Like kind of like what you're trying to say, I think, is they were looking for something that matched their preconceived notion of what the book, an outdoor adventure book, should be.
Yeah, I guess, I kind of butchered the question, but I guess the real thing is that they feel like, did you get the sense that their feeling was like, this is the kind of book that men will buy, but they won't buy it if it's about women, if it's focused on women. They need it to be focused on men.
Maybe. Maybe. And I guess I'm really proud that I feel like I have a mixed gender audience, that both women and men like my books. And I'm really proud of that because I don't want to write for one group. I want to write for both.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, I will just say for anyone who's hearing about this book for the first time, any of my male audience, check it out. This is a really a good book. It's a really good book. Um, Now I know all of us in this day and age deal with freelance editors. Everybody wants you to have put your book to a freelance editor. In this day and age, it's almost impossible unless you're already a very well established, and I mean very well established, because I have lots of acquaintances who have 8, 10 books in their history traditionally published who are still not able to get that next contract unless it's gone through freelance editor. So don't take that personally. But there's good and bad, there's up and down. Maybe tell me a little bit about your experiences with freelance editors, because again, on my current manuscript that my agent's selling, I'm right in the middle of it, where I have an editor I've just paid a lot of money, who's made suggestions that a really, really big change in something, and I'm in that struggling part of, am I going to do it or not? And I know you felt a little bit of that same thing, which we were just talking about, but maybe go into a little bit of depth, I guess, on your experience with editors, good and bad.
Yeah, I would say my experience with freelance editors has been good. With Trail of the Lost, I used Audie Alcorn. He's actually a friend of mine, and I knew he, had the right eye. and also use Mary Cole. She's mainly focuses on a young adult, but I like she was very organized. But how I used them was with my first pages, because I just wanted to get these first pages just really clean and read really well. Because as you know, that's what you're going to submit is your first 10 to 50 pages. And so that's where I used them. Um, and they gave good advice that, there was nothing, it was positive. As you know, with advice, it's great when you get confident enough that you're really open to feedback, even critical feedback, but you're also confident enough to go, I'm going to use this, but I'm not sure this is going to help me. And that's just a great place to be where you're really open, but you're not so open that you let an editor steer you wrong, like the editor that wanted me to focus the story on the missing men.
It's such a tough call because, like I say, when we use these folks, they get paid well. It takes time, so you're waiting for them to get stuff back to you. You have a very deep personal investment in this creative product. They're not, they don't have that emotional attachment, so they say the things that they think, and it really does put you in that position of having to decide if that is advice that you want to take, even though you just paid a lot of money for it most of the time. It's a tough one. But it's one we all have to go through in this day and age. There's really kind of no way around it. So. Um, I know it could not have been the only challenge too. Maybe what what do you think were maybe some of the high points and low points in this process for this book? Because as you said, it's very different from your previous four books. What what are maybe some of the high and low points for you here?
The high points is it was exciting, a story. I embedded myself. I wasn't an objective journalist just calling people and taking notes. I was in there investigating, I was working with them, I was traveling with my characters, and that was exciting. I would even say fun, maybe, even though it's a dark thing, but it was fulfilling, is maybe a better word to use. That there's also a low to that because I would kind of get sucked into some dramas and stressful things, and also the sadness and the grief that the families were feeling. But I knew I had to be open to that, to let myself feel it so that I could write about it authentically. But that was hard. It took a toll on me. There was one moment I was in the living room with my husband. I was in tears. I hadn't sold the book yet. I've gone wasted 3 years of my life. I don't know where this is going to go. And that was a real sad, low moment for me. But I stuck with it, and it ended up being a wonderful, the outcome was wonderful.
Yeah, I talk to writers a lot about that, about, that moment I think we all go through where you legitimately question, is this worth it? You know, and it's all of it. Am I good enough? Am I the right person? Am I just not a good enough writer? I mean, there's all the stuff that comes with it. I mean, one thing about any creative endeavor that you're trying to sell, it'll beat the living hell out of you. And so I'm curious, you in your background, as I noted, you've been a backcountry ranger, you've done wilderness rescue, you're a nurse. I didn't even mention some of the incredible outdoor things that you've done in the course of this book. As you noted, you were deeply embedded in the searching for these people, chasing down possible sightings, possible clues. And you had everything from the psychics to the LiDAR radar people. I mean, you were dealing with a tremendous breadth of of personalities, is what I mean to say. And as you noted, the families, uh, people who maybe didn't always have the best motive for being involved. There was that. And then just the reality of, yeah, you run into some real squirrely people and you start to wonder, okay, maybe did something really bad happen to these people, and dealing with that stuff. So um, again, long-winded intro. I apologize, but all of that leads you to a place when you're starting to write this story. Tell me a little bit about how. your life experiences, all of them, impacted you as you wrote this story, and maybe what it helped you bring to the story.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I started to see it as kind of like a trifecta. I was a writer, I was a former law enforcement officer, and I was a nurse. And so sometimes each sort of event or when I'm interviewing somebody, one of those roles would seem to be the one that was needed. And so I would pull from that role. Like sometimes I'm the writer, but then sometimes the person I'm interviewing is in tears because they're dealing with something horrible. So I'd kind of go in a supportive nurse role. Then out in the field, I'm investigating and somebody looks suspicious, and boom, I'm back in the law enforcement ranger role. Um, so yes, my life experiences are just constantly shifting and flexing, as I was working on the book.
I have to imagine that was really helpful too in dealing with the industry. Because what I know from my time again, and I've never been a rescue person, though I've I've had a couple of experiences in the backcountry. We were on a trip several years ago where my brother-in-law got very badly hurt, and thankfully we were able to get him out without having to go to the extremes of calling for a helicopter or anything. But it informed how I go into the woods these days. So I became certified in CPR, and I take wilderness medical training every year. I renew it every year. All these things because I had this moment where I thought, oh my God, I mean, I could have been in a situation. My wife and I could have been in a situation where we had to watch somebody die. Now it wasn't anywhere near that bad, but I was projecting out to thinking like this is how serious something could be, right? And so it makes me very cognizant, much more cognizant than I ever was before of all the pitfalls going forward. It also gives me, I think, some perspective. I'm a political reporter and editor by trade, and I deal with stupidity day in and day out, right? And it doesn't phase me the way it used to phase me. I do not get amped up about things maybe the way I used to. And so I'm just curious. So we were talking about how it helped you write the book. How did it help you deal with the industry?
Yeah, I think part of what you're hitting on is maturity. You get more mature, you get a little, you've already dealt with a bunch of BS in five different ways, right? 50 different ways. And so you go, well, okay, I'm dealing with this kind of person. This is the strategy I'm going to use with them. And so I did notice that, yeah, I want to say I'd be more patient with people in the industry and more pleasant, and not get in their face. I can be a get in your face type of person, but with maturity, I've learned to save that for when it's absolutely needed.
I can so relate. I'm sure anyone who's listening to this that knows me would be going, uh-huh. Um, we've talked a little bit about the families, of course, of these missing hikers, and dealing with them, which is obviously got an emotional component, but there's a legal component too. When you're telling somebody's story, um, you know, tell me a little bit, I guess, about maybe the vetting process that you went through with this, either with them or with the publisher or anyone else when it came to, how much of a story, how much information you were able to reveal or what have you.
So with my primary characters, Kathy Tarr, real people, and Sally Fowler. Kathy Tarr is an amateur searcher. She's sort of one of the stars of the book, and Sally Fowler is the mother of one of the missing young men. I'm kind of go in that nurse role, and I learned I would just be very honest with what my intentions were. And while I was interviewing them, and that I said, we're gonna have to talk about this low moment that you've had, and some of your vulnerabilities and your fears and your mistakes, because people are actually going to relate to that. And so I would just tell them I'm going to write about these things. So that's why the way I handled them. Now later, when I got the publisher and we're getting ready to publish it, I went through a legal vetting process with an attorney for the publisher, which was fascinating to me. And I was glad they were doing it because I had to call out quite a few bad guys, bad actors in the book. And so that's where they really came in, is to make sure, we don't get sued for defamation or libel. In that process, that it was like a conference call with me, my editor, and the attorney. And I got the sense the attorney was really worried I was going to be like a pain in the butt, like I wasn't going to want to change anything. But I felt collaborative with it. And so she would say, this is a problematic sentence or a troublesome phrase. And I said, well, okay, how, instead of cutting it, what if I make it change the word? Change this word or that word. And it worked out really well. We were actually able to leave a lot of stuff in there. I just changed the wording enough that it was to keep it from, making us vulnerable to a lawsuit.
It is interesting. I have some experience in that area too, because obviously, I'm the editor-in-chief of a publication that covers the California State Capitol, and I am responsible for every word that goes into the publication. And so there are definitely times where I have to run stuff by our legal people, sometimes even like an op-ed. And I've had people say, well, it's my words, right? How could you be responsible? I'm like, well, as soon as we publish it, I'm responsible, whether I wrote it or not, right? And so it is, thankfully, I've not never run into too much of a legal problem, but it is something that you have to think about. And when you start dealing with the lawyers are afraid of everything, right? But that's what you're paying them for, right? You're paying them to say, where could I be in trouble here, right? Is there a place we could run into trouble? So kudos that you found some diplomatic way to deal with the legal eagles because they can be challenging, I know. Um, I wanted to talk to you about adaptations. I've talked to so many and options, so many authors. Again, this is another one of those things. You write a book, whether it's a fiction, nonfiction, you go, and then somebody wants to option the book for Hollywood, for TV, Netflix, whatever, and you're like, home free. I'm finally made it, right? Well, I know people who've had their book optioned seriously 8, 9 times by the same person who just keeps renewing the option, has never made the movie or the TV series. Not uncommon at all. Others, they get all the sniffs and then it never peters out. Or what? Tell me a little bit about for you, because my understanding is that you've had now. I don't know. Have you actually had signed option deals, or is this were you in negotiations? What was your situation?
So my last three books, all three of them got significant interest. I've been in meetings. I've had big names interested. CBS optioned Ranger Confidential. Trail of the Lost got real close to a deal for both scripted and unscripted. Ranger Confidential is currently under a shopping agreement and being pitched. So this has been over the course of a decade or more. I even starred in a pilot that wasn't made, of an unscripted show. So, but you're just right. When that first happens, you're like, oh my God, they're going to make a TV show about my book. And then now I'm like, okay, you know, nothing's going to happen,
Right.
kind of thing. You get jaded after a while. But I've learned a lot through the process, and one thing I learned is it's really important that either you or your agent keeps the film rights, especially if you have a small publisher, because I feel the small and medium publishers, they don't have the savviness to handle the negotiations. Because I've had them run the gamut. I've had them be like real greedy to the point that they're pissing people off. And then I've had them be so enamored that they just take the first offer. And so that, you need to be more in the middle. And that's what I've noticed. The smaller publishers, they're just not as savvy. Now I'm represented by WME, and I feel like I'm in better, I've got a better, somebody got my back a little bit better with that.
It is true, and look, I know there's all kinds of reasons to have an agent and to not have an agent, and to go independent or small press or whatever. There's all good reasons for all those things, but yeah, there's a reason why it's valuable sometimes to have people who play in that sandbox because they're used to being in that sandbox and they know how to maximize for their clients. It's just really hard to get them to let you in the sandbox with them. That's where it becomes really challenging. I've told people this a million times. They ask me about writing. I always say, well, you got to know what you want out of it. what you want out of it and what you'll be happy with. And if you'll only be happy with a New York agent and a Big Five publisher, as you were in this case, then that's great. Really hard to do, but if you can do it, that's great. If you're happy, as with your earlier books, publishing because you knew that market, great. Again, but it all starts with us. That's one of the things. It starts with us, and I think that's a real hard lesson that a lot of people in this learn way too late after we've made all the mistakes, right? Then we go, oh, okay, I know I have, right? So, again, long-winded lead in. What maybe in these processes from over the course of these five books, what's the biggest lesson you've learned? Like what is that mistake you've made where you look back, you go, oh my God, that was so rookie. And maybe, what would you advise someone else when they're coming in to be thinking about in this process?
Yes, all those subsidiary rights like film rights, adaptation rights, audiobook rights, especially, if you have an agent, there's more of a template of what they tend to accept or not accept, so it feels a little less tricky. But if you're selling the book yourself to a smaller publisher, um, I I wish I'd go back in my last two books and that, I had hired an entertainment attorney to negotiate the contract for me. Because, there's just some issues with audiobook rights and film rights where I wish I had advocated for myself better. So that would be my advice is it's probably worth a few $1,000s. Or there's so much information online, just really make sure you've studied all those clauses in the contract so you know exactly what you're agreeing to and how that matches the industry standard.
Yeah, contracts. Oh my God, clauses in contracts. I think everybody who's ever again put a creative entity out there to try to make a profit off it has mostly musicians. I grew up with a lot of friends of mine became professional musicians from my younger days, and they tell you all about signing bad contracts. Um, I want to stay on audiobooks for just a second because you said you've got a great tip for writers on how to be better prepared for when an audiobook is produced.
Yeah, now over the course, see, I've been writing what, like 16 years now, and the audiobook environment is totally different now, and it's huge. And depending on your contract, the ratios of your royalty should be more lucrative on the audiobooks. See, because the publisher doesn't have to print paper, for that, so it's cheaper for them. And so one, I'd be as you're writing, be very aware of how would this sound as an audiobook. Read it out loud, have somebody read it out loud, and keep that in mind is one thing. The other is what I've learned on my last two books is pronunciation. When you do get your audiobook and the voice actor or actress is reading it for you, even if you're doing it for yourself, but if they're doing it for sure, pronunciation of even sometimes common words and names is an issue. So I suggest, like in my next book, for sure, what I'll do is any word that I think is difficult pronunciation, I'm going to write the pronunciation in the manuscript. And that way, even if I have to take it out when I send it to the editor or agent, I'll have a copy of the book that has all those pronunciations in there. And then at the end, you could print all that out somehow, pluck it out, and send it to this voice actor so that because it's kind of embarrassing for both you and the reader, the voice actor, when they pronounce something wrong and everybody picks up on it.
Yeah, I've often joked because we have a podcast for work, and I've learned, ask somebody no matter how obvious it looks, ask them how they prefer their name to be pronounced. Because if anyone's going to screw it up, it's going to be me, and it's embarrassing as hell, So yes, have you ever done any of your own audiobooks, or do you always hire actors?
The publisher always hires actors. I think maybe they're worried that my southern accent would distract people. But they never asked me to read my own books. I don't. Maybe that's a good thing.
Well, I think most authors don't, just because there's so many, trained voice actors who do this for a living, I guess it makes more sense. I'm trying to think of somebody that I can think of who's read their own audiobook, but I don't think I'd want to do it. Again, I use my voice for a lot of my living, and I've to do lots of podcasts, done lots of TV and radio, and it wears you out. I don't think I would want to sit there and read 100,000 word book and try to
Uh,
give it inflection and
yeah, I'm kind of with you. And maybe one, I think where it's been successful, like a Mel Robbins, a self-help kind of book. I think maybe with those books, having the author read it works.
yeah.
But when it's a narrative, when you have different characters and, a voice actor can add different voices, I think a good one could do a much better job probably than we
Yeah,
can.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit too before we get too wrapped up here about the outdoor culture and hiker culture and this genre of books, I guess. Because there's uh, so many out there, and a lot of them are great. I've read a lot of great ones. I'm sure you have too. Are there maybe what are some of the really good outdoors books other than your own that you feel like you would recommend to people?
Well, the Cold Vanish is another good one about a missing hiker case. I'm trying to think what have I read recently. I really like Susan Casey's work. If you like the
Oh,
ocean and dolphins, her work, I love all her books. I'd read
yeah, I read
anything
The
she
Devil's
wrote.
Teeth.
Yeah,
That
I
was a
love
great
that
book.
one too, about the sharks. So those are just two off the top of my head.
Yeah, hiker culture is such an interesting thing. Now, again, I think we did the High Sierra Trail one year, but I've never done the PCT. If you've ever been in the Sierra, you've done parts of the PCT, but I've never, even thought about trying to do the whole PCT or the whole Appalachian Trail. And you've done some of these really incredibly long, strenuous things. You've done the kayaking um, trips and things like that. Um, what is it? I do believe it takes the people that do the really big stuff. That's a whole different mentality than those of us who are, outdoor enthusiasts. You've got to be beyond an enthusiast to do the PCT. That's 2,200 miles of some of the most rugged territory in North America. Um, Maybe share a little bit with me, I guess, your thoughts on hiker culture and wilderness culture and what draws people to this and what makes it such a rich environment for a writer.
So I am a through hiker myself. I did the entire Appalachian Trail in 1999, and that's 2,200 miles from Georgia to Maine. And I've done portions of PCT, but I haven't done the whole thing. But these long distance journeys, they are pilgrimages. Usually, not always, but usually the person is in a transitionary stage in their life. Maybe like me, I had quit my job as a park ranger, which I write about in Ranger Confidential. And that was a way to get back to what I love nature, to go back and enjoy it. And it's almost more of a pilgrimage than an athletic challenge, although it is quite an athletic challenge. So that's a lot. And also, of course, you're drawn to just be in nature day after day after day, to see the seasons change, to be there all day long, night, morning, day, and just immerse yourself. Now, through hiker culture on these long distance trails, there's also a social culture. People, they keep notes and trail registers, they communicate that way. They have trail names. Mine was Tennessee Walker. So you go by your trail name, not your real name. And so it's like another identity. And I write about in Trail Loss, coming off the trail after that, it's an adjustment period for hikers. And
Mhm.
some of them uh, experience something called post-hike depression afterwards because it's such a change and you have to re-enter society.
Absolutely. And like I said, you can meet the vast majority of people you meet are really great. There are definitely some squirrels you meet out there. I have noted that. Um, uh, some of the folks that you talk about in Trail of the Lost are folks I actually was not familiar with. I had not heard of, I'm not, maybe I'm not supposed to say the name, but there was a particular group that you might fairly call a cult. that is out there. I've not run in, at least not that I'm aware of, because I know they don't exactly go around with a sign on saying, "Hey, we're part of this group." But I think it is one of those things that is a big attraction too, is there isn't that little element of danger when you're out there. And that's appealing to you as a person, and to me as a reader, it's also appealing to read. And I haven't read Ranger Confidential, though I guarantee goddamn to you I'm going to as soon as we're done with this show. I'm going to order this book because I love the stories of the Rangers. I really do. I mentioned Randy the last season earlier in our conversation, and I love that because I learned so much about backcountry rangers. And we were actually hiking the High Sierra Trail when I was reading that book, and we ran into two or three of the rangers that were mentioned prominently in that book, and I felt like I was meeting the Beatles, right? It was one of the great kind of coincidental things, but that life is so appealing. It's got such a pull on people. And I think you did a really great job of capturing what that pull is for everybody, whether they're a ranger or a hiker. Um, Again, sorry, I keep asking these very long-winded questions, but the question here is you you've had such great success with this. What is next for you? Are you going to stay writing in this genre? Is there something else that you've wanted to get to? What's next for Andrea Lankford?
I am taking a break right now. That uh, travel loss wore me out. Even the business aspect of it wore me out a little bit. So I'm taking a break right now, and I just don't quite know yet what I'm going to do next.
The business end of this will wear anybody out. That
Mhm.
that is a fact. There's no question. Well, I like to end shows with my little hypothetical question where I get to be the omnipotent being who can put you together with any one of the following three people, and you tell me who you would want to spend a little time with and why. And the options, there's a little bit of a through line here. You'll figure it out pretty fast, I think. The options I'm going to give you today are Teddy Roosevelt, who should not need any explanation who that is. Amelia Earhart, also. And then the great Swiss adventurer, Sarah Marquis. Um, I could put you together with one of those people. Who would you choose and why?
Oh, hands down, Teddy Roosevelt. It would be interesting to see how he would react to a woman like me, from 100 years later, but who is as adventuresome as he was. And so, yeah, I would love to sit down with him and share stories, war stories. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, could you imagine what his take on our world today would be fascinating unto itself. But yeah, but um, seeing I guess the world of nature from his perspective and what it looks like today would probably be very shocking for him. You'd be a great tour guide for him.
Yeah, yeah. I wish we could both, that would be part of the dinner is I could go back to his time for a little while and he could tour me around and then he could come to mine and I'd tour him around and we'll compare notes.
Absolutely. Seeing places like the Dakotas and everything from the turn of the 20th century it's probably very different from the turn where it's at right now. So, well, anyway, Andrea Lankford, thank you so much for coming on the open mic, Writers in Their Own Words. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I love Trail of the Lost. I am going to go get a copy of Ranger Confidential. And I urge everybody out there, if you haven't got one of Andrea's books, you should do so. You should also probably tell a friend about this show, have them listen to this conversation, and they can learn a little bit of something about her and about her work. Um, Again, Andrea, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks. It was fun.
Absolutely. Well, I'll leave you all with the same thing I always do, which is tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So whatever you do, please make today count. Until next time, I'm Rich Eisen, and this has been the Open Mic Writers in Their Own Words.